Start with this. Welcome, everyone. I'm Aviv, talking from New York. A word about myself because I'm not the star of this show. I'm leading partnerships at Sweep, and we're really excited to have today's webinar. And one of the most interesting topics, at least in my mind, in partnership with RevGenius, this amazing community that we're all member of. So thank you, RevGenius, for partnering with us on this very important topic. And with that being said, we're going to talk today on RevOps team of one. And I guess many of you guys are still a team of one and thinking to yourself, how can we make it happen? When am I getting more team? What should I tell my manager in order to really build a team right here? So we gathered today three of close friends of ours and amazing RevOps people that are or were RevOps team of one. And we're going to have this discussion today not as a lecture. We have an agenda. We're going to cover a lot of topics, but we really want you guys from the audience to send out questions to our speakers. We have great success stories, also some failure stories today. And we're hoping for everyone to enjoy the next hour, to feel part of this great community that it was built, obviously, to support us, the RevOps people. And that's it. With that being said, I'll be happy to introduce our speakers today. We have Emma, Akash, and Benjamin, and we will let you introduce yourself, each one of you. So Emma, you go first.
Awesome. Thank you, Aviv. Hi, everyone. I'm Emma Heist. I'm the RevOps manager at Passport, which is an international solutions provider for e-commerce brands. In my current role, I oversee revenue operations, go-to-market systems, and enablement. Prior to Passport, I began my career in sales ops and Salesforce at ClassPass, where I was very lucky to have some amazing mentors who set me on the path I am today. Super excited to be here with all of you and share some of my learnings as a team of one.
Emma, are you still a team of one?
Thankfully, I was able to hire last August, so I have a fantastic analyst who's joined my team.
And okay, so we're going to talk about this. We're going to talk about this as well today. What is the path to succeed in growing your team, and what will be the next hires after being a RevOps team of one? But we're going to touch upon this later. Akash, you go next.
Hey, everyone. Great to be here. My name is Akash. I'm the Director of Sales Operations at Tecton. And what Tecton does is it powers machine learning applications. So any real-time needs, Tecton's behind the scenes. I've had a non-conventional path to operations. I guess I'm not sure if there's a conventional path. I was at Medallia for 4 years, from insights to business value, ultimately into operations. Worked at my next company, company called SnapDocs, where I led operations and combined all the go-to-market operations from sales, marketing, customer success, and then ultimately joined Tecton as a team of one. Hopefully, I'm on the same journey as Emma. I'm actually hiring, so hopefully, that happens soon. But yeah, it's a good journey. I'm happy to share some best practices, and good to be here with this team.
Amazing. Thank you so much, Akash. Ben, although I know you very well, but not everybody knows you enough yet.
And hi, everybody. I'm Benjamin. I'm the head of RevOps at Sweep. Sweep is a visual platform to manage the backend of Salesforce. And this is my third time being a RevOps team of one. So I've been one, I've gotten a team up to 9. And at that point, I said, hey, I'm going to come back and do it all over again. So excited to share my thoughts and experiences of being a team of one with all of you today.
You're just doing it too well, I think. That's the reason. You don't need any more people. And yes, what Ben just did was submitting his LinkedIn profile here in the chat, and also Akash and Emma will do it as well. So as myself, feel free to connect with us. And again, if we will not be able to address all the questions, we're always happy to continue answering and supporting the community. But before we're going to talk about succeeding as RevOps team of one, I think we should probably start with something that we all face, which is a failure. It's not always successful. So Ben, why don't you share with us a time that you failed as RevOps team of one?
Yeah, absolutely. And this is one that still makes me blush when I think about it. That's how you know how bad it was. And it's from my first role. I was a Salesforce admin, just joined a new team, learning everything about Salesforce, and I built a workflow rule. So that's how you know how long ago this was. I built a workflow rule to alert my finance team, every time we had an opportunity that was close won or close lost, and I forgot to check a very important checkbox or add an important condition to say that it should only run when something becomes close won or close lost. After activating that, my outsourced finance team didn't work for my company, received thousands of emails, rendering their inboxes totally useless for the day. And they were unable to work and not very happy with me. So that was, I'm actually blushing now retelling the story. So something very embarrassing that I learned a lot from, and have only made that mistake one more time in my career.
Emma, Akash, you have any embarrassing story or a failure that you want to share with us?
I think my biggest advice is just be careful with data loader, especially for those of us who are system admins. Deleting things, inserting things, be really, really cognizant about what you're doing there.
Signing up for too much. That's been a big failure. And to echo Benjamin's story, I did something similar where it started pinging the company general channel, and it just kept going on and on. And so luckily, I was also on that channel. I caught it pretty quickly. I was like, oh my God, this is not good.
So I think this was a good opening just to show that for all of us, right? For everyone that joined today, that we're human, right? RevOps are human. I know sometimes it sounds unreasonable, but RevOps are human. But in this case, I do want to kick off with our first question for today. And I think it's actually one of the most burning or pressing issues in RevOps, which is, who do RevOps report to, right? Where this team of one is sitting, and how it's affected your work if you're sitting under, different managers. So yeah, Akash, do you want to start?
So I've had different experiences with 3 different companies. Most often, I've reported into the CRO. Here, I report into the VP of Sales. What I will say is my observation is when it's under a line of business leader, there's inherent tension because as a RevOps person, your job is to be as objective as possible. Finance thinks you're part of their team. The line of business leaders thinks you're part of their team. So what side do you take? And this is very pertinent when you're doing planning discussions or, capacity models, or you're doing compensation design. You have to straddle both sides, and you're doing the right thing for the company, but you're also trying to do the right thing for the team. And I'm saying that because those are very recency bias for me, and we're going through our compensation, finalization cycle. So all of this is very pertinent. There was a period where I ended up in finance very briefly, and I will say that was the most objective because you are independent. You're rolling it out for the organization. So I felt that was the least friction place for it to be. I know some organizations have COO, functions, and that generally happens when you're very mature. So I can't say because all the companies I've kind of gone through the early stage maturity, never been in a COO org.
And Akash, it's funny that you say that. So for me, I have reported to a COO, a CFO, a CEO, and a CFO at the same time. And for me, I found that while finance is the most objective, they're also the most fiscally responsible. And one thing that you need to be careful of is tension-wise when it comes to growth, right? If you're a team of one, you're probably at an early stage company, and maybe less so over the course of the last 12 months, but it's always been a growth at all costs mentality. And so sometimes you really need to justify, hey, why are we doubling down on this money burning pit of lead acquisition model right now? Because it's creating great growth, but it costs a lot. So my takeaway has always been that it matters who's in the seat and their understanding of RevOps and what your role is. So I've had finance people that really, really understood, no, this is right now, the goal is growth at all costs. And, money burning pit is okay for today. So I think it's really all about the leader's understanding of RevOps. And I think there's no consensus on what RevOps should look like across all different companies. So I think it's really important for you, regardless of who you report to really make sure that you have alignment on what is your job, what is your role, and that for me has always led to the most successful outcomes regardless of who I've reported to.
Emma, where are those? Yeah, go ahead.
Oh, go ahead. I think it's really interesting that you say like leaders' understanding of what RevOps does. In my current role, we're at a like less mature startup, so I report to the VP of sales, which I think has its advantages. You're very tied into like what the team that you support need. But I've almost done like a RevOps road tour where I've gone and met with like the head of data, head of product, head of finance, so that they understand like while you sit within the sales org. If this is you, I feel like this is a really important thing to do, like when to loop you in and when you like how to understand the difference between what sales needs to be looped in on and what RevOps needs to be looped in on. So doing some sort of like RevOps education can be really impactful if you sit on one of those like less agnostic teams.
Thank you. I think it's a great segue for another topic, which is, Emma was mentioning that it's all about communication, right? We need to communicate with the different stakeholders in the company, explaining them what we are doing. This is considering the fact that we already understand what we're responsible to and what we should do as RevOps. But we all know this feeling, and I guess everybody felt this probably this week 5 times, that we're being pulled all the time to different tasks, projects. It's very unclear what is RevOps or where RevOps responsibility is starting, where it ends. And I guess if you can share, Emma, with the audience today, how do you manage your workload? How do you manage your backlog? How do you prioritize your work as RevOps team of one?
Yeah, that's a great question. I think this answer to me has like 4 buckets. The first is being intentional about how we're spending time across reactionary and proactive work. I had a great boss at my last company who introduced like the Eisenhower matrix to me. So urgency, importance, whatever you want to call that. And really giving projects that level of detailed thought at the front helps you to understand where they should lay in your roadmap. I think also secondarily, this can be viewed as maybe not a priority when you're a team of one because you don't have to manage other people's workloads. But implementing some sort of like ticket system has been really critical for me, just like managing my own backlog. And so really training up your stakeholders to submitting those and including all relevant details, and then also creating them for yourself so you have that like visualized roadmap. From there, you can then like fit that into the matrix. And then as we touched on, communication. So especially as a team of one, it can be really easy to get super heads down and just trying to like check all of the million things you have on your list off. And I think more so than with a larger team that has like more bandwidth and manageable workloads, communication on evolving deadlines and roadblocks is really key with all of your stakeholders. So kind of pointing back to that RevOps road tour, making sure they know like the scope of your responsibilities so that when you come to them and say, hey, here's a roadblock I'm facing, here's why this is going to shift, there's a general understanding of why that came to be.
Akash, any best practices you want to share with us today around how you do it?
I'll kind of double down on what Emma said. So I also use one of the outputs I run. So let me take a step back. On the beginning of every quarter, one thing I learned was to do kind of like a stakeholder alignment workshop. Depending on the size of the organization, it may be a multi-day workshop. Right now, it's half a day for me. And the idea is to document all the wish list from those stakeholders, from myself, from all the requests we've gotten throughout the quarter, and just go through like, here's all the wish list that we could potentially do, and then have them sign off on what's urgent, what's important, and who is the executive sponsor. I think the executive sponsor piece is important because if they don't believe that they are going to sponsor a project, then they don't actually have a buy-in into it. So the output of that workshop is that 2x2, Emma, and I actually publish it so everyone in the company has access. There's a simple link to it. And what I do is mid-quarter check-in with my leader and say, hey, here's how we're pacing. Any new requests, anything that major comes in, we check against that. So I keep that as live of a document as I possibly can. The other thing, that's more of an operational thing with me and my direct leader. The other thing for the organization I do, and this came from a couple of requests because the CEO was asking like, hey, look, you're doing a lot. I want to know what are the 0 to 1 things you're doing? What are all the under maintenance things you have? Because I want visibility into what should be prioritized. So the output of that became a 3-column simple matrix of like, hey, here's all the maintenance stuff that RevOps does. Here's the foundational things we're building this quarter, and here are the enhancements we're doing. I think it was a very good exercise for me as well to see. And every quarter, the maintenance stuff keeps growing and growing and growing. And now we're having the discussion to say, hey, some of this should move to another team, or we should have another hire dedicated for X, Y, Z.
It's interesting, the common thread that I hear between you two, and I definitely have had similar experience, both with the urgency and importance matrix, as well as having something visible for the whole team to understand what your priorities are, as really, really important. And I'd say for me personally, I go through periods where I'm great at that, and I go through periods where I'm terrible at it. And so my MVP version of that is a Google Doc to-do list that says, hey, here's what I'm working on right now. And I think one of the most important pieces of doing this, the two most important pieces of doing this is, one, having something that you're able to prioritize really, really quickly, right? So if it's a Google Doc, right, I can put the things that are, or a Google Sheet, I can take the things that are most important and put it at the top. So people know, hey, these are my main focuses right now. And then the other thing is having some way to show the current status of it, right? Particularly for some of those like bigger strategic projects. It's not usually something that you sit down at once and you complete, right? It's not something you sit down for an hour and you're like, oh, this task is done, and like, let's check it off. These are things that you move forward increment by increment, bit by bit. You will get blocked a million times going forward. And so just being able to show the status of each of these at a basic level as like not started in progress done, or more, or like even more incremental, like, hey, here are the building blocks of this piece and here's what's complete. For me, that's also been really, really important. I will also confession right now, I'm full Google Doc. That's how prioritized it is. And sometimes I lose the Google Doc and I just start a new one. So that's where I am right now.
So I think first of all, thank you all. I think I heard from you guys talking a lot about prioritization and communication, and I think it's also leads us to ask about goal setting, right? Again, one of probably the most interesting and pressing issues in our space as being RevOps team of one. How are we being measured? How do we communicate those goals? How are we getting approval for those goals? And how do we work with leadership? Again, it could be the CFO, your manager, or the CRO. In many cases, we have goals that are related to different departments and different teams. So goals could be related to the CFO, but one could be related to the sales. And I guess the question is, we'll start with you this time, Ben. How do you work with leadership to set goals and measure them?
So I think it always starts with company goals. And like as a RevOps person, your job is to help make sure that the company hits those goals. And I think as RevOps people, very often we want it to be like this super data-driven approach of, what's achievable for this year. But the truth of the matter is, particularly at a high-growth startup, what you really need is like a big, hairy, audacious goal that is set by leadership, by the CEO, by the founders. And then your job is to look at those goals and see, are they achievable? And under what scenarios they are achievable, right? So, hey, we want to 3x this year. Well, that means we need this much revenue. That means we need, going down your conversion rate ladder, figuring out, okay, how many leads do we need? Okay, if it's not feasible to expand to those leads, we need to increase conversion rates here, here, and here. And so using that to set like the big picture focus of where we're going. That's how I typically am setting goals. But it starts with taking that big, hairy vision, making sure it's achievable, and mapping out a path to achievability.
And how would you do it without, I would say, the responsibility part? Because again, in the end of the day, we have our way as RevOps to support those KPIs of sales, but we're not necessarily the people that are executing it.
When done right, RevOps can be seen as a partner to all teams, to all leadership teams, right? Whether it's supporting through data, whether it's supporting through process and strategy, you should be seen as a partner. And if you're able to, you need to park yourself alongside those leaders and help them achieve their goals, right? You can't be the outcome of everything, but you can influence things as best as you can. And making sure, again, your leadership understands what you're trying to influence and why, and how you're trying to do that, and making sure they're aligned. Again, going back to the first thing we said, with this is my edict in this company, and this is how I operate. And that's not just, leadership, your direct boss, but that's also the people you partner with across the org. I think that's true of everything. And if those people don't understand, well, then that's where you have misalignment, and that's where a lot of the issues stem from. It's really such a foundational piece in doing whatever you need to do, whether it's goal setting, whether it's task prioritization. You really need buy-in across the org about what you're there to do.
Emma, let's talk a little bit about your goals.
Yeah, Akash and Benjamin make a really good point about being very tied in with the stakeholders and different teams in the company. I do something similar with Akash of when we're setting goals for the quarter or the year, whatever the planning cycle looks like, you need to meet with the stakeholders that you support in order to understand their goals, because they have the much more sell this much, get this many leads, the more measurable KPIs, and then finding their pain points, synthesizing all of that information across the teams, and then finding the best path forward in order to set your own goals. So making sure that we're kind of evaluating their priorities and goals first, almost, in order to set ours is really, really key, or at least understanding where theirs are. And then I also will say, though, especially as a team of one, making the space in that goal setting to prioritize foundational revenue operations work, especially when it comes to teams of one that own system administration. There's a lot of, or enablement functions, where there's a lot of foundational structure that has to happen. I think that's been not a challenge in a bad way, but as a team of one, where I have to prioritize both that foundational work and the supportive work for the teams. And so using that kind of, whether OKR or planning framework in order to advocate for that is really critical in order to setting yourself up for success.
Akash, have anything else to add?
I am not going to give anything more than these two already. But I'll give a cop-out answer. What I do is essentially a backtrack, right? We have a company level OKRs, we have department OKRs, and then ultimately it's a conversation with, hey, these are the 4 things our organization has to do. Let's say right now it's sales. What am I doing to support any one of those 4? And oftentimes I'm supporting all 4 in some capacity, right? It's just underlying. It's in service of that. So, we have that conversation, and then that feeds into the workshop. Sometimes it's explicit, hey, we didn't have proper XYZ tracking. Here's what we're going to build. This is our foundational project. That becomes the department OKR. So that's the cop-out answer. I'm not going to. I think Ben and Emma already kind of shared a lot of color.
I think we managed to cover some very interesting insights around, who are we reporting to and who are we talking with? And what I heard a lot from you guys is we are supporting, right? So a lot of us are seeing ourselves as a support function that supports the go-to-market or the finance. So we always work with other departments, with other stakeholders as a support team of one. But I guess something that is really interesting for me, and probably also for the audience, is who are your mentors, right? Who are you seeking help from when you have a challenge, when something is not working, when you have a career issue? Who will be the person, assuming that obviously the CFO or the head of sales are not coming from RevOps, they're not necessarily aware of what we are facing in the day-to-day. Who will be the people, and Akash, this time we'll start with you, who will be the people that you're talking with or you're asking for an advice?
Frankly, it's never been operations people. It's when I ask for advice, it's been with the folks that I've built the strongest relationships with. The 2 prior CROs I worked with, very strong connections. We were together for 4+ years. And so we understand the language. And so those are my go-to mentors. Specific to a task, hey, I'm having trouble with XYZ with this RevOps related only. I just have a network of folks who are doing similar roles. And Ben, I will volunteer you as one of them because I Slack you constantly. So even though Ben and I work in different organizations, I'll Slack him. And if there's any, thing I can't solve, that's what I would do. So those are two different things. One is a tactical, one is a strategic one. That's kind of, and always try to build the right connections and mentor programs. I mean, for yourself, no one's going to do it for you. It doesn't exist. You have to build it through trust and repetition and so on.
Emma, tell us a little bit about your mentors.
Yeah, definitely. I think this is a really good question and very pertinent to being a team of one. Something I didn't give transparently a ton of thought about when I was taking this role. And I think there's a couple of things that I've done. First and foremost, I'm very lucky to have some fantastic mentors from my previous roles who I've stayed in touch with. So as Akash mentioned, using that network that you already have established and people in similar roles. Being cognizant that they also have full-time positions and are busy folks. I think communities are really key. Remember Rev Genius, RevOps Co-op, just a number of different ones out there, where you can ask questions like thoughts on auto-converting leads or a software reco for something that you're trying to sell for. So those can be really beneficial for a sounding board for folks who are in similar roles. And then functions within your company that have similar roles and responsibilities. So maybe you're not going to them for like the tactical, RevOps question, but things like data, product, solutions engineering, even like a BizOps or project management. Some of these functions will exist in the smaller early stage startups that many of you will find yourselves in. And I find them to be very helpful when you need just like a more like sounding board or less tactical support. And they're also great folks to commiserate with when you need it. So always try and make friends with those teams at your company.
Just to vent sometimes. It's all we need. Sometimes
you need it, exactly.
Benjamin?
So for me, it's anyone who is smarter than me. This
is why you're never coming for me for questions.
And that's not true.
That's next to each other.
But I think like going out and meeting people who do the same thing as you, do different things than you, similar to what Emma was saying, you can learn something from anybody. Like I have formal mentors who have been in ops. I have formal mentors that have not been in ops. Last night, I went to one of my direct reports because he's way better at data than I am. And so, he was talking through, an issue with me. So, I mean, I think going out and meeting people is the best way to do it. Communities like RevGenius, awesome for that. But really just finding people who are, you're in RevOps, you're dealing with everybody and everything and everyone. You're more of the jack of all trades type of person, likely. Hopefully you have something that you are very, very good at. But you have to acknowledge that there are people that are better than you at lots of things, and finding those people, connecting with those people and being able to turn to them. For me, that's how I tackle it. And also being one thing I learned, plugging a book that I read early on in my career really changed the way I thought about networking. It was called Never. People like to give. People like to help. Asking for help, asking for advice is extremely flattering. So you might think I'm in this like bubble of stress and nobody understands where I'm coming from and kind of like bottle it in. You really do need to vent. You do need to talk. And sometimes even reaching out cold to somebody who you think might have experience with solving some issues that you want help with works. I've gotten some of my closest mentors through cold outreach. And so don't be afraid to do that. It's really important.
I suspect that a few of you guys might turn to be mentors of some of our audience today after this session and giving such a great tips. But actually, I think we're at half of the time of this webinar already. Do we want to leave some time for Q&A? Because I'm seeing a lot of good questions coming in, and we're not ignoring them. I'm seeing them, and by the way, for some of them, we're going to touch them. We're going to touch upon them later in this conversation. But I think we now can start talking about how to get out of this situation, right? You've been RevOps team of one. We know it's impossible and it's not sustainable to do it so long. Obviously, it depends on the size of the org and the growth of the org. And I guess the question, Ben, is, and again, you said you're not good at everything. We can't be good at everything. So how do you make case in order to make your team bigger? So how do you really make the case to adding to your headcount?
So a lot of leadership really wants to stretch RevOps as far as they can. And frankly, it's their job to do that, right? So it's really on you to communicate when you're underwater and when you need help and where you need help. And you really need to think about that. You might not need help necessarily where you're spending the most time, but you may need help where you are the least strong, and there are very, very crucial needs. So I think being in touch with yourself and be really advocating for yourself, right? Like you're going to go and say like, hey, I need to hire. And the answer will probably be no. The first time you say it, you need to, consistently communicate where you're at, how you're feeling, and why, and point to real examples of why you need help. Saying like, I'm ready to hire isn't like nobody's gonna be like, oh, if you think that you need to hire right now, then you're not good enough at your job. That's not the case. I think the person who you report to is probably a little more aware of how you're doing than you think they are, but they're not necessarily going to jump and be like, here's a new hire, you really need to go out and advocate for it. And that's not just a RevOps thing, that's in any role.
Emma, you managed to, both Emma and Akash, you recently managed to get some more headcount to your teams. How did you do it, Emma?
Yeah, I think Akash made this point earlier in the webinar, but documenting like your run the business as well as the projects and more strategic initiatives that you're involved on. And I also really like to keep a like no or not yet list, because it really helps you highlight like, because of all of these priorities that I have right now, this is what I haven't been able to get to. So I think that's a really good step in the direction of like, if I have another resource to take some of this off, here's XYZ what they'll manage. Here's what I can then level up to do. And I also think too, when we talk about just from a professional development perspective, many of us, and maybe this is the same for you guys, but I think when we're a team of one, we come from a very like successful IC background. And so starting to demonstrate how you can be strong in that management function as well is really critical, especially if you're a team of one early in your career. So finding those opportunities for like mentorship and people management, I think also then ultimately highlights your ability to take on a person and grow your team.
Thank you. Akash?
I think it's the same thing I'm going to echo as what Emma said. The backlog list is the primary one because, as a team of one, you're in high demand. Customer success wants you, finance wants you, the CEO has a special project they want you. Well, all comes at the cost of what you've signed up and aligned with the stakeholders for. So everything else becomes backlog. Eventually, the tide's going to turn and say there's too much in backlog. We have to have those things done. So we have one of two options. Either someone else is going to do it, and most often that's not the case, or you're going to make the case to hire someone. And as a team of one, it's your job. I think no one's going to advocate for you. So you have to do the documentation. You have to have that, messaging and frame it correctly. It should not come as a like, hey, I need to grow the team because I can't be a team of one forever. I mean, it's all in the context of the business needs at the time. So think for the business first. The case will automatically appear, and then you have to frame it in the right way.
Yep. I agree. And I think, we managed to run 36 minutes of this webinar without mentioning the word strategy even once, I think. But I do want to touch upon this thing. And Ben, we might need to count it later. We have a bet on this. But again, we know that RevOps people are usually very busy with tactical work. Being pulled from many directions. We're in this busy, hectic schedule. And by the way, hiring is one of those initiatives. How do you find time for strategic thinking, on looking how will your team or department will look in a year from now, or what are the things that should be changed in the company in order to make the RevOps team bigger? When do you find time to do those things, Akash?
It's a tough battle, man. Tough question. I think everyone wants to be in the strategic position. So I would say one thing I always keep in mind is every quarter when we sign up for new projects to do, there's one strategic element, which is cross-functional. The business needs a high priority project that I prioritize. What you mentioned is that's one element of strategy. The other element is long range planning for your team, or how is the team going to fit into the overall business plan for the year. I try to do that once a quarter, right? Or specifically around when we were doing the business planning cycle. Okay, for this year, this is our goal. For this half, this is our goal. I kind of align myself and block out times to do the long range planning. How does my team fit into that? How does my charter fit into that? And then every quarter, I do some sort of a split. It's never 80-20. You say yourself it's going to be 80-20. It's never that. It's something else. So I can't say
it's more 80-20 on what you plan of doing today versus what you thought.
Exactly. So I don't want to put a number because you're going to fail if you put that number. But if you can do one strategic project per quarter that impacts more than just your organization or some foundational thing, hey, that's a win. That's a win for the organization.
So you would define strategic project as something that is not necessarily tied to RevOps alone, but something that touches different parts of the organization.
It could be tied to RevOps alone. If your mission for that, let's say when I first came in, there was no sales process. If my mission is hey, we have to get our sales process in order, we have to get our data in order, our reporting is a mess because of it, well, that is a strategic project for the organization, but it's also for RevOps. But as you grow, it's your scope and mandate keeps growing. So that's when the cross-functional ones become more important.
Ben, do you have anything to add to this?
So blocking off strategic time is a great start, whether it's on a project or on your calendar. But I found two things really help. One, you find yourself doing the same thing over and over again. Try to automate it. That always frees up time. And with those time savings, hopefully you can fill it with strategic work and not just tactical. But the other thing that I find really helpful is when you find yourself doing tactical work, think about how it's adjacent to strategy. And dive into strategy at that point in time. So a great example and a very easy, clear-cut example is working on reporting, right? I'm sure you get reporting requests, dashboard requests all the time. Well, when you're pulling the data together, look at it. Does it make sense? Does it look the way that you expect it to? Are the trends that are showing up what you expected? Why not? What's changing in your business? Are you slicing this in the best way, right? And doing that helps you say hey, here are the reports you requested. Also, I noticed I was looking at ABC and I'm thinking that it might have to do with this. What do you think? And that always engages people in strategic conversation. And that's a great way to get a seat at the table, show people that you are a strategic thinker that's there to help them. I will also say, and I learned this the hard way, you need to be really careful at how you're delivering that. Not all data is up and to the right. So if you are finding something that possibly doesn't look great, you definitely need to be careful of how you're delivering that information. Don't just drop it in the Slack and be like, hey, down and to the left, this is bad, but say, hey, I am noticing this trend, and engage in a conversation on why that can be and how we can potentially reverse it. Maybe you have a thesis, but maybe the leader sitting in that department has a very good reason for why that's occurring, or something that you're not necessarily aware of. So take the data, look at it, analyze it, try to understand it. That's a great example of doing strategic work while you're doing tactical work and showing your value to specific people while you're doing tactical work.
Amazing.
I really like that point, Ben. I'm going to jump in here really quick and just say, I think we can fall into being task completers sometimes, especially as a team of one. So the way that I challenge, maybe it's not data in my perspective, but when we get requests of can you build this, or can we have a process for that? They may come to you with their preconceived notion of what needs to happen. And so the way I find ways to be more strategic is to take a look at their request, think of all of the cross-functional teams that I'm connected to, and then find ways to like challenge what they've proposed in a way that's like more effective or more efficient, especially as you like level up in your career, instead of being just like, cool, they asked for this, I built that. Moving it into more of like, that's a great idea. Let's come together in a group with the right stakeholders and put together a solution that's scalable instead of just like what they're asking for at the moment.
Yeah, I think slowing down to speed up is critical. And when you're the first one, you're eager to show your value. You're saying yes to everything, but eventually you have to slow down, I think. So I echo that, Emma.